and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I am good, and we have a guest back with us today. He was with us a couple of episodes ago, Alan Carr. Alan, welcome back.
Hey, it's good to be here, part of the two timers club now, I
That's
guess.
yeah. You're
It's
one
like
of
on
the. You may be one of only a couple of people that we've had back. But Alan
it's,
is the senior historian at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and Ray, what I know we were talking about what we're going to talk about today. Why don't you kick us off?
You bet. Glad to have Alan back with us, and I've enjoyed my relationship with him over the years. I visited with him in Los Alamos a time or two, and he's been here to Oak Ridge, spoke for us here at the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association, and he has developed presentations over the years over some of the unique history of the Los Alamos area and New Mexico. And I already asked him today if he could start by talking to us a little about the Trinity test that was held down in, everybody thinks it's right near Alamogordo, New Mexico, but actually, Alan, it's closer to another little city that is not mentioned as much. You might talk about that a little bit, and then give us some of your insights into the Trinity test. I'll have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed an opportunity I had a few years ago to go down there and spend about 4 hours as the only person at the Trinity site, other than the uh, uh, public relations persons from the White Sands base there, and it was an amazing event for me to be there, especially with no one else. It's just quiet and it's awesome sight. So, talk a little about the Trinity test in New Mexico.
well, let's start at, I guess, modern day, then we'll work our way back really quick. And I say that because you mentioned White Sands Missile Range, and you mentioned their public affairs office. They've got some really wonderful people there with a tough job. Ray, I've been there probably 4 or 5 times over the years now. It never gets old. I mean, and I'll talk about some of my experiences there as well. And I've never been there during the open house day. During open house, they'll have two, 3,000 people there. And for those who aren't familiar with I mean, this is an active missile range. And so bringing 3,000 members of the public into an active missile range is no trivial task. And so I really appreciate the folks down there for what they do to open up their site, not just to us, but to all of these
They,
around the world.
Alan, they do that twice a year, I believe, in March and October. Is that right?
I believe so, approximately at least. Yes, in the spring and again in the fall. But they're great folks, and of course, my favorite is Jim Eccles. Jim is retired now. I want to mention Jim. First of all, he's got a good book called Trinity, which I highly recommend to anybody who's interested in this subject. Jim took me on some really memorable tours there to the site where usually for the open house, you get to go to the McDonald Ranch House, which is where they assembled the pit for Trinity, and to Ground Zero, of course, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there's other interesting sites there as well, and Jim's taken me there. I mentioned Jim also because some of the information that I'll share today came from Jim. Jim's corrected my work, and I greatly appreciate it too. So I appreciate him. And during one of those trips down there, I went with Jim Konetka. If you look up James Konetka, he's written several books on the Manhattan era and a lot of nonfiction books as well. Wrote one of my favorites called The General and the Genius for anybody who would like to see that. It's about the relationship between Oppenheimer and his boss, General Groves. But that was fun being out there at the test site for several hours with Jim Eccles and Jim Konetka there. But Ray, let's go back. And you talked about Alamogordo. Trinity is forever going to be associated with Alamogordo. And I'll tell you why I think that is. I don't know if there's an official reason or not, but Alamogordo's a long way from ground zero. All
Yes,
right.
it is.
And
Morocco, I believe, is closer, isn't it?
yes, San Antonio, New
Mhm.
Mexico, just to clarify, San
Yeah,
Antonio, New Mexico, Socorro,
yes,
these are a lot
Socorro.
closer. The so so the first thing is the White Sands Missile Range back during World War II was known as the Alamogordo Bombing Range. And that's
Ah,
where this name comes from. Okay. So it's a huge area. I looked this up the other day. It's the size of Delaware and
wow.
Rhode Island put together. It's a lot larger than the Nevada test site. You know, the Nevada test site I think is a little bit larger than Rhode Island. So the bombing range was and still is huge. The other thing, so again, this Alamogordo business, the main gate of the base is closest to the city of Alamogordo.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the whole range got its name. But remember, this is as big as two states put together. So ground zero's a long way. It's much further up to the north. And if we were going to name Trinity after a city, I guess it would be, probably San Antonio, I think is the largest. But
Mhm.
Alamogordo's stuck over the years. But
Okay.
it's kind of misleading. It's the area itself, Ray, and having been there, you can share your recollections with the audience as well. I think it's a beautiful place, and it's in its own way. A lot of people might think about, like a beautiful beach or mountains or something like that. It's not exactly like that. I mean, it's this beautiful. It's beautiful because of its desolateness, if you will. It's wide open spaces, as you would imagine, for which are appropriate for a nuclear test. There's not much there now. The way that I put this sometimes is, when you go to most historical sites, you go to George Washington's house, you want to see George Washington's house. There's something to see. It's kind of sort of like it used to be, but not the Trinity site. I mean, all of the main things associated with Trinity are gone. There's obviously no longer a weapon or a test device there, I guess is the better term. The tower from which it was conducted, it's gone as well. I mean, it's radically changed. And even post shot, the site itself changed very quickly after the test was over. And so it's an interesting historical site for sure. I'll let you guys jump back in.
So
No,
Trinity. So for people who may not be familiar, tell us what is the significance of the Trinity site.
Very, very good, Keith. So the Manhattan Project is this enormous national project, and we talked about that last time. And the scientific culmination of the Manhattan Project was the Trinity test. Okay, so Trinity was the first proof test of a nuclear device. And as we all know now, of course, it was completely successful. It exceeded most expectations for what would happen there. It, I think you could make a pretty strong argument. I know there are counter arguments too, but I think you could make a pretty good argument that Trinity was the single greatest scientific experiment ever conducted. Now, as we're going to make the argument for, Trinity represented the culmination of decades, not just really Manhattan Project, but all of these decades of scientific discoveries, which had started back around the turn of the 20th century and even a little bit before. So you've got, enormous advances, obviously in physics, but also chemistry, metallurgy. You go on down the list, and Trinity is kind of emblematic of that, if you will. You've heard all of this kind of trite stuff now, like dawn of the atomic age and everything. Well, it may be kind of trite, but I think that in a way it's true. There were a lot of significant discoveries on the road to Trinity, but um, Trinity really changed the world. The advent of this new technology changed everything. And again, kind of sounding like you know cliches and all of that. With the success of this new test and with the opening, if you will, of this new era, you had a tremendous amount of hope in that, atomic energy, I mean, all the promise that came along with atomic energy. There were times when, after, in the early atomic age, when people were talking about, energy will be so cheap we won't even need to meter houses because of this great new energy source. And there are many applications, of course, for nuclear energy. And of course, on the other side, you're bringing nuclear weapons into the world, and you hear a lot of people, a lot of different perspectives on that. It appears that, at least thus far, nuclear weapons have helped render global wars between the great powers obsolete. There's been nothing on the scale of World War I, World War II since the end of World War II. I do think nuclear weapons have played a part in that. There are a lot of other things that have played a part in that as well, but it's not like a really, as Norris Bradbury, our second director, would say, to paraphrase him, it may not be the most elegant or statesman-like way to keep the peace. Hopefully something better will come along, but it does seem to work so far. And so again, promise, peril, Trinity, learning so much about science, these reactions that at least play a part in how stars work in the universe and everything else. All that, in a way, kind of comes back to ground zero. And of course, ground zero, I think, represents the entire effort of the Manhattan Project. We talked about weapons design at Los Alamos last week, building the nuclear weapons, helping deliver them, things like that. There would have been no weapon to test had it not been for the materials that were produced elsewhere. I mean, it is really the culmination of the effort of 500,000 Americans. And I think that when you go to that site with all this in your mind, it makes it extra special.
I was
I,
doing,
I,
I was,
I agree.
excuse me, Ray. It kind of reminds me, I was doing, after my first Secret City documentary came out, I was doing a radio interview, and it was one of these where people called in and asked questions. And I had a fella who said, "How can you make a movie celebrating the atomic bomb?" And, and my response to that, and it still is, my film was not about the atomic bomb. My film was about patriotic Americans who came together to do something that would end the greatest war ever known to man. And it celebrated their efforts, not the result of their efforts. And like you said, so many people will focus on the destruction of atomic energy and not the um, the 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 advances in all kinds of science and technology that have come from that project. Um, so so I completely understand what you're saying there.
I would only add that the one thing that Alvin Weinberg said was the most important contribution Oak Ridge ever made to the world was nuclear medicine. And I think when you put that in balance with nuclear energy and the other scientific advances coming about in the nuclear age, there's a lot of very good things that came from the discovery, culminating in Trinity and the things that happened thereafter. And I agree with Alan on the effects of nuclear weapons and the fact that we've not had a global conflict. It almost makes it uh, unthinkable to enter into something that would be so destructive. Now, I too, having worked at Y-12 for a long career, uh, I too hope that we never use a nuclear weapon. And I would love to see the day when there are none, when we've got to the point that no one has that capability and even desires to develop it. So that would lead to a peaceful situation that I can't imagine just yet. So as long as there is a need for nuclear weapons, I want us to have the most and the biggest.
And also, Ray, I would, in sort of an odd way, I would compare, you know, the nuclear age to the industrial age. I mean, the industrial age brought us a lot of great advances in all kinds of things, but there were some negative things about it as well. Um, and the same has come from the nuclear age. You know,
Right.
there was some there's some negativity associated with it, but I really believe the positives that come with the nuclear age far outweigh any negative things and continue to far outweigh any negative things that could have come along with it. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to say
I,
that.
I'll just say one more thing about the actual site, the Trinity site. It's a long drive to get there, and once you get there, it is, as Alan said, it's a wide open spaces. I mean, you can see mountains in the far distance, but it's very flat and it's very open. The ranch house is just an amazing place to walk through and imagine what was taking place there. But when you're standing at ground zero, there's this huge monument that's there, and just a little bit, I mean, only a few inches of the tower can be seen in the ground. But everywhere you look on the ground, if you just reach down and just take up a handful of sand, you're going to have some granules of Trinitite, the melted glass, if you will, that resulted from the explosion. That's still there. And of course, you can't take that away. That's not possible now. But years ago, it was possible, and people carried that off in their pockets. I mean, we have some here in Oak Ridge in museums, and I have a small piece that a man gave me who took it away in the 60s. So there's Trinitite that resulted from that explosion that people have and are proud to have as collection. So it's a tremendous site.
Indeed.
Anything more about Trinity, or are you ready to move on?
Well, I'll mention about the Trinitite really quickly.
Okay.
The device that was used at Trinity, which was an implosion device, they set it off at the top of a 100-foot steel tower, and there's not really a lot out there about why they used a tower. I think that the main reason that they used that was to get good photographs of the fireball expanding. You know, if you set it off directly on the ground, you're going to get a lot more dirt and other stuff that you know, kind of kind of hides the expansion of the fireball. By putting it on a 100-foot steel tower, you can get nicer photos. You can get other good diagnostics as well. Again, just blowing it up on the ground is going to foul up a lot of diagnostics. And Trinity was a heavily diagnosed test. So when the bomb or device, I say bomb or device because, you know, if you've seen pictures of it before, it's just this big ball of high explosives in a case with wires all over it. It's not been weaponized by our friends at Z Division in Albuquerque quite yet. And so device is the more appropriate word. So of course, when this thing goes off, the fireball comes in contact with the ground. It vaporizes most of the tower. It shatters the lower portions of it. It scoops up hundreds of tons of earth into the fireball. Okay, and it melts it. And so the finer portions of the dirt that are scooped up are ejected into the atmosphere, and of course they're irradiated as well. Now that stuff's going to fall somewhere, and this is where the term fallout comes from. These irradiated particles coming out of the air, which are hazardous. You know, when you set off a nuclear weapon, there's going to be a lot of fission products that can be potentially very dangerous to people, animals. There's a lot that goes into that. You know, the amount of material that you may be exposed to, if you ingest it or not, how long you're exposed to it, different things like that. You may have a follow-up question on that in a bit. But anyway, going back to the Trinitite, the heavier particles, of course, they melted and they rained back down to the ground in molten form. So it's literally raining melted desert sand. When it reaches the ground again, this material resolidifies into a greenish glass-like material, and that's what the Trinitite is. And so if any viewers out there, if you go to a museum maybe you go to the museum in Oak Ridge, or you go to the museum here in Los Alamos or somewhere else. If you see Trinity or Trinitite on display, do keep in mind that material was inside the fireball of the world's first nuclear test. And
Right.
you'll probably have a whole new appreciation for that little rock that you're looking at. There aren't a lot of places to get a real deal legitimate piece of Trinitite. Ray, as you mentioned, I think that early on, literally truckloads of this stuff was taken out because there was this big sea of Trinitite that was produced by the test. But at the National Museum of Nuclear Science, I hope I got the name right there, Jim Walther is the director down there in Albuquerque. They've got a nice gift shop, and they do have some legitimate pieces there. And that's probably the only place where I would recommend getting them, just because you'll know that you're getting the real deal there. And that'll be a good segue to your next interview, it sounds like, too. With
yeah, we are talking with Jim, and he'll be on our program in the future. And that Clay Perkins has donated the construction of a replica tower of the
yes.
Trinity test that's outside the museum there now. And yes, Jim is proud that he has a supply of legitimate Trinitite that
Yes.
that is for sale, and he uses it as fundraisers.
So is
Yes.
Look
how
forward to talking to you.
valuable? Excuse me. How valuable is the Trinitite? I mean, is it? I mean,
that would be, I guess that'd be a better question for Jim, since he's
okay.
Probably got a corner on the market there in
Probably.
Albuquerque. I mean, it's not cheap. I mean, as I recall, you get a little piece like that or something for, I don't know, $100 or
Okay.
something. I'm probably way off, but Jim can get us corrected. And yeah, Clay, I'm glad you mentioned Clay. I know Clay Perkins.
Great, yeah.
He really is. He's an interesting person. He'd be a good interview for the show one of these days too, I
He
bet.
would.
Yeah, he put up the money to build the replica tower there. And so you can walk up to that, and I think I've been to the museum at least once, maybe twice since it's been there, and it's a great addition to their collection. I should mention about the tower just really quickly before we move on. The force of the blast was so significant that it pushed the ground down. Okay, so it vaporizes the upper portions of the tower. It pushes the ground down. Now, that tower was 1/2 of a 200-foot Blau and Knox radar tower. Okay, so it was not like it wasn't a tower that was built specific for Trinity. They just took a 200-foot radar tower, cut it in half, and bam, there it is. Pretty significant tower. So it's got reinforced concrete holding its footings in the ground. So when the device went off, it pushed the ground down, it exposed the reinforced concrete holding the base of the tower in place, shattered it, and exposed the rebar. And so if you've seen these photographs of General Groves and Oppenheimer at ground zero, and there's like that mangled rebar there, keep in mind that rebar had been inside concrete underground before the test pushed the ground down, exposed the concrete, shattered it. And so, I mean, really a very, very powerful detonation.
How far were they away from that? How far were from the device being exploded?
So there are different ranges. And so kind of depending on what you did. And so we'll start out with the closest people. The closest bunkers were at 10,000 yards, which is like 5-6 miles away. There were 3 bunkers. They were not exactly on the compass, but you had one at 10,000 yards north. This was a small photographic bunker, but it's where they got most of the pictures of Trinity. And Jim Eccles took me there. That's kind of a rare treat because it's not very easy to get to that one. So again, thanks to our buddy Jim for that. The West 10,000 camera bunker, similar, not as many cameras there, I don't believe. It's a little bit easier to get to. If you go to Trinity on one of those small tours, you might ask your guide if they can take you there, because I think it's just right on a road. And then the main control bunker was at 10,000 yards south. Okay, so we've got north, west, south. Oppenheimer would have been at the 10,000 south bunker. Other notable names: Enrico Fermi, George Kistiakowski, the spy, Oscar Sabor. So remember, Sabor was exposed as a spy just in September 2019 by Harvey Clare and John Earl Haynes. I found out just this past December, going through Trinity records, his name is on the diagram because that's where the geophone recording equipment was, and that was his job during the Trinity test. So he was working during the Trinity test.
Mm.
His little room in the bunker was right behind the main control room in the main control bunker. That's where Sam Allison gave the countdown for Trinity. And so you think about that, somebody who one of the atomic spies was probably within earshot of the actual countdown, which was
Wow.
broadcast over the radio. Norris Bradbury was there. I mentioned Fermi a while ago. You might have heard of Fermi's famous paper dropping experiment. After the blast, they went outside, and of course, you see this brilliant, bright light. And that's all that you see. You don't hear anything because remember, light travels so much faster than sound.
Right.
So you're just watching this brilliant light on the horizon. And then it takes a long time for, relatively long time for the sound wave to get there, maybe about 40 seconds, 30 or 40 seconds later. When it arrives, the way I describe it, and we do have film of this at not from Trinity, but of other tests. Imagine if just all of a sudden I put a leaf blower on high and put it right in your face and shot a pistol right back behind your head. That's what it's like when the shockwave arrives. There's a tremendous bang, and all this pressure comes through. Well, Fermi had, to measure the blast, he dropped a piece of paper before the blast wave traveled through. It fell straight down. As the blast wave traveled through, he dropped additional pieces of paper. The blast wave moved the paper, I believe, about 2.5 meters. And so, based on the shift of the paper, he calculated the yield was equivalent to 10,000 tons of TNT. The official yield currently is, because people are always looking at it and reevaluating it, I think that we may have a new estimated yield coming out of the laboratory later this year in an article that's going to be published in the open literature. So stay tuned for that. But the current official yield was 21,000 tons of TNT equivalent. And so Fermi was only off by a factor of 2 using a blank sheet of paper on the fly. So not
Wow.
not too
Literally,
bad.
literally on the fly.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But those
Wow.
are the distances. And Keith, let me finish out that really quickly. The other General Groves was a little bit further away at the base camp. There was a camp that was built to support operations at Trinity. Uh, I think that they could have something like 400 people there. And that's probably about how many people officially witnessed the test, too. It would have been in the low mid hundreds. But General Groves would have been there. I believe Jim Conant, who was his scientific advisor, Vannevar Bush, a lot of Manhattan Project significant folks were there. Phil Morrison was there as well. And Phil, who was one of our physicists, he said, what got me was not the brightness of the flash, it was the feel of the heat on your face. And base camp was further away. It was like 17,000 yards away. So now
Wow.
you're getting up to around 10 miles away. And he said, I could, at 10 miles from this thing, I could feel the heat on my face on that cool desert morning. And then the biggest group of people were at Campagna Hill. If you've read books, maybe you've heard about Campagna Hill before. If you visited the site, you've been very close to it. So when you go through San Antonio, you continue driving to the east on New Mexico Highway 380. Not very far, a few miles past San Antonio, and there is a north gate to the base. This is called Stallion Gate. Remember, the main gate, if you will, is kind of a little bit closer to Alamogordo on the east. But up on the north, there's a smaller gate called Stallion. That's where most tour groups come through. Campagna Hill was about where Stallion Gate is. You'll notice there at Stallion Gate, there are hills around there. One of those was Campagna Hill. I think Jim Eccles knows exactly which one it was. But there were literally bus loads of scientists from Los Alamos who went to go watch the test. And that's where they watched it from. And that is about 20 miles away from ground zero. And so we have, and this may be of interest, it's something that I'd be happy to send to you. One of the most recent pictures of Trinity that we have released was taken by an aero camera at Campagna Hill. And at Campagna Hill, Richard Feynman would have been there, Ernest Lawrence, Edward Teller. I think another spy, Klaus Fuchs, watched the test from there. These are scientists who played important parts in the Manhattan Project, but did not have an actual job to do at Trinity, so they were further away. But I can send you that picture. That the Arrow film that was taken. I bet you've never heard of this. Maybe you have, because you guys know photography quite well, as I recall. But have you ever seen a 9.5-inch format film? So
No.
each
Yeah,
frame
I
is the size. Yeah, see. I mean, they're really rare. So Keith's seen one. Each frame is the size of a sheet of paper.
yeah,
I mean, these are really kind of obscure now, but they were meant to take these big panoramic views of large areas. And so
yeah.
we had an Arrow camera running, and our friends at Livermore, we sent them to film this film to scan. We own the
Uh-huh.
original film
Yeah.
and still use it for diagnostic measurements. They scanned it for us at Livermore. Jim Moy and Greg Spriggs, more friends of ours, and Jim sent me the frame that was taken. And it's because it's so panoramic. You see Trinity, you see the blast over on this side, and you can see the mountains in the background. And there's a little camera, or not a camera, but a clock that's embedded in that frame over here. And you can see hills in the foreground as well. I mean, it is publicly releasable now, but we've not shared that image yet.
You know,
And
it
so,
I'd
it
love
it
to
is.
have
It
a
was
copy
the
of it.
it was the original. I mean, the Arrow camera was the original high definition camera. I mean, because it just captured so much. Um, the smaller you get, the less information you're going to have. The bigger. It's just like digital photography now. The bigger your sensor, the more information you're going to get. So that's what that original slide or negative was. It was to capture more information in
yes,
a
Uh,
in kind of a rustic way. But
that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
oh, well, that'd be amazing. I'd love to have that image. So if you'll send it to me, I appreciate it.
I'd be happy to. Yes.
Yeah.
good.
Well, what amazing insights you've shared with us about Trinity. Thank you for that. We really do appreciate it. Are there other things you'd like to share with us about your role as historian there, and things that you think would be of interest to our audience? So let me give you the freedom to share with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Ray and Keith. It's great to be back here with you today. And so, yeah, I mean, this is I have a lot of fun with my job. Hopefully that shows through. I mean, it's early Saturday morning here. I'm still having a blast, this, so one thing is, I get to give talks, get to do interviews like this, get to do some writing as well, get to tell stories, and that's really what we, as historians, try and do is tell good stories. Um, the Manhattan Project era was just the beginning of the story of Los Alamos. And so one thing that I like to do is talk about, well, what happened next? Why didn't we close down after the war? And we almost did. There was, I think, some real talk of that. We lost most of our staff. In short, the main reason that we remained around was the Cold War. As the Cold War started to solidify after the end of World War II, so did the future of the laboratory as well. And as much as I like talking about Trinity and, the ancient history back during the Manhattan Project, which everybody is fascinated with, regardless really of, and, a lot of this history is subjective. Maybe you think using atomic weapons was the right thing to do. Maybe you think it was really the wrong thing to do. Again, it's subjective. It kind of depends on your point of view, your personal values, your assessment of the military, so, all these different things. But regardless of where you stand, it is a fascinating story, and people are very interested in it. But we've got like nearly, I guess more than 75 years more history there, and we've done some really remarkable things. And so, I like talking about what we did during the Cold War. I like talking about the development of the stockpile. One thing that I like to talk about is why it got so big. I hear people say, well, and I should mention, for those of you who don't know the numbers, in 1967, the United States reached the numerical peak of the stockpile. We had, I believe, 31,255 nuclear weapons. And sadly, when you hear people that are very bright and knowledgeable on this talk about it, they'll just use words like crazy or ridiculous. And that's not really analysis. Now, you might think that there was no need for any nuclear weapons, and that number is pretty staggering when you think of over 30,000 of them. But there is a, there's an answer to why there were that many. And I think that, scholars kind of sell themselves short when they don't at least talk about the reasons and let people make up their own minds. Was it crazy was it crazy or not? But there's very little analysis on that. And I do like to talk about the stockpile so that, again, people can get the facts and they can kind of decide what they want, again, based on their standpoint. So I think that that's an opportunity lost when we don't go in and talk about those things. I like talking about nuclear testing. That's one of my areas that I've studied quite a bit. The United States conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests. The last one was conducted in September of 1992. It's been a long time since we conducted one. What do we do since then? And of course, the United States still has a nuclear deterrent. And the story of stockpiled stewardship, which is the program that we use in lieu of full-scale nuclear testing to ensure the safety and reliability of the deterrent, that too is a really interesting story. And then there's things that have nothing to do with nuclear weapons, or at least not very much to do with nuclear weapons. I think that today, and actually I'm not sure about the number, so I won't even make a guess, but a large percentage of the laboratory's funding is used to do research in the fields that are not don't relate to nuclear weapons. Of course, nuclear weapons in that mission are at the heart of our mission today. It's the large portion of the budget, but we've been doing space research, for instance, since the mid-late 1950s. We were developing nuclear rockets to go to Mars a few months before NASA came into existence. So our pedigree in space research is longer than NASA's. Goes back further than NASA's. I should say we've developed satellites in conjunction with Sandia for hunting for clandestine nuclear tests. That led to arms control treaties being signed because there was no way to verify them before. And so I think that technology helped change the course of the Cold War after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everybody remembers the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. Not many people remember the Partial Test Ban Treaty that was signed 1 year later, the following October, in October 1963. We wouldn't have signed a treaty that we couldn't enforce, but we could enforce it because of those satellites, the Vela program, the Vela satellites that were developed by Los Alamos and Sandia. And so there's things like that. During the 70s, for instance, there was the fuel crisis. So many people don't have any concept of what the fuel crisis was. We went from being the world's leading exporter of oil on the eve of World War II to being the world's leading importer of oil by far in the 1970s. And, the tap was cut off. So what do we do? And the laboratories were part of the response to that. The laboratory here at Los Alamos, we started developing hydrogen fuel cells. We developed solar panels in conjunction with corporate partners. I don't want to mislead the audience and make them think that we forgot nuclear weapons and all of a sudden we're just looking at solar panels or something like that. That's not what it was. But it started to work its way into what we did here at the laboratory. In the 70s, we really developed into a multidisciplinary laboratory. And that's what we are today. I mean, you can find scientists here. Have you seen some of the stuff coming in from Mars, from the Curiosity rovers and different things like that? Of course, NASA is responsible for putting those on Mars. A lot of our people, though, are responsible for developing some of the most significant instruments aboard those, the rovers. And they operate them and they collect data. And you might check out Roger Wiens's book. Roger Wiens is one of our scientists in this area. He wrote a book called Red Rover. You can find it on Amazon. We've got, right now, let's say that you're going to that you make it to Mars. And it's probably going to take you maybe the better part of a year, 9 months to get there. Our rover rockets that we had developed back in the 50s and 60s would have got you there in 3 months. about. And we did build 3 nuclear rockets that worked. The nation just ran out of money and interest after Apollo 11 in taking that next step. But we did build 3 working nuclear rockets. But let's say that you actually get there, then what? How are you going to have oxygen? How are you going to have water and things like that? Well, we have scientists who within just the last couple of years have developed small kind of modular reactors that we call these kilowatt, or not kilowatt, but kilo power reactors. And so you can use one of these, doesn't make a lot of power in and of itself, but if you start stringing these little reactors together, you would have enough to power a habitat to produce the oxygen that you need to make water and things like that. And so I encourage people to look this up, the kilopower reactors. We're still in the in that business right now. I mean, it's really an exciting time. We have 12 or 13,000 people up here. The laboratory is 35, 40 square miles. I mean, it's a big place. Some of the most powerful instruments on Earth. I mean, it really is a national asset, as are the other national laboratories as well. And so, yeah, we're still maintaining the stockpile. Don't mess with America. That's kind of part of the message here.
Yeah.
But boy, we're changing the world too, just as they are at Oak Ridge and other places.
And the folks from Oak Ridge can really relate to what you're saying, because it's very, I mean, our experience here is similar, as far as the path that we took. And, we almost shut down after World War II as well, and then started to find our way into other things. There are other people like Ray who know a whole lot more about that than I do, but but the folks here in Oak Ridge can relate to what you're talking about, because it was a similar path.
Yeah, there was a lot of similarities between the experiences that Alan and I both know about and share with people. And as you can tell by his demeanor as he's talking about it, it is close to his heart, something that he really enjoys. And I have that same experience from being involved in Oak Ridge history over these years and watching the National Laboratory here expand and take on multidisciplinary tasks, just like Los Alamos has. But also knowing that of those 31,000 nuclear weapons, every single one of the secondaries was built at Y-12. So and they are in fact coming back to Y-12 as we disassemble them and store that material here. So we're in lockstep with Los Alamos in that respect, and also in the helping NASA with the space research, that the material that powers those aircraft and the equipment that's being used, that the national laboratories are involved in that as well.
And we can't forget about telling the story for those, and I'm sure people have heard it time and time again, but there may be some people listening that don't know that the original original box that carried the moon rocks was manufactured right here in Oak Ridge. It developed and manufactured right here. And I guess it's there's a display of that at the Y-12 Center, Ray. Is that correct?
Yeah, Y-12
Y-12
History Center. Yeah.
So,
yeah, we have the moon box there, and we also have one at the American Museum of Science and Energy as well.
Alan, is there some place, if people want to know more about your work and the history of Los Alamos and all those kinds of things, I'm sure you have a fairly robust website that talks about the history and all those things, don't you? Can people go there?
No, we don't. I don't know why we don't. I wish we did, and maybe we can have one one of these days. The laboratory's had history pages kind of throughout its at various points in the internet age, but right now I think there's like one page, and I didn't write it, and I don't have anything to do with it. So, but again, maybe that'll change. There are some, let me give you some resources though. So that's just the web. The laboratory has some really great publications that I would recommend, especially for those who are interested in kind of what the weapons program and does, and the national security mission. We have a wonderful magazine called what is it? It's I write with I share emails and write with them all the time. We work on articles. It's new national. You're going to have to cut this part out of the recording.
No, that's
It's,
okay.
I mean, I know all of the editors and everything
I
else.
can
but
I can sympathize with you.
You
I
can
have these
sympathize.
kind of problems all the time.
Oh man, it's National Security Science magazine, and the reason that I couldn't think of that is because I work in the National Security Sciences building. The journal
Yeah.
used to be called the Nuclear Science, the Journal of Nuclear Science, or something. So I was thinking we do this all the time, but National Security Science magazine is it's a wonderful publication. I think that people would enjoy that. You can find it online and download PDFs. Also, I give a lot of talks, and I give talks on demand. Ray, you mentioned the talk that I had the privilege of giving when I visited Oak Ridge last time. If there's somebody listening and you've got a group and you'd be interested in hearing a lecture on Trinity or the nuclear testing or the rover program, remember our rocket science program, I give lots of talks and things like that. I also have a personal YouTube page, and it's not affiliated with the laboratory, but on my YouTube page, I've got close to 50 videos on there now. And almost all of these came out of the laboratory. And a lot of them are people coming back and talking about what it was like here during World War II. So it's people, who now, unfortunately, they've all passed away, but Harold Agnew, who filmed the attack on Hiroshima and was our third director, I think there's like 3 talks by Harold Agnew on there. Frederick Ashworth, who was the weaponeer for the Nagasaki mission, on and on. There are also a lot of documentaries on my webpage as well. Some of these are from World War II. Some of them are from after World War II, talking about other programs. A lot of these documentaries were made in the 50s and 60s. The most recent one I put up there is a documentary on our first mainframe computer. It was called the Maniac, and it was built. John von Neumann was one of the people involved in it. It was the team leader was a guy named Nick Metropolis. We have a building named after him. But anyway, there's a 20-minute documentary that was made in the 50s on the Maniac computer, if you're interested in that. And so there's all of these lab videos, many of which are pretty obscure, and I knew that they were publicly releasable. So as a private citizen, I requested them. I put them on my page. I've also got some playlists on there as well. There's one playlist that has different videos that I've appeared in. And so, for instance, the first podcast that we did is on there, and I'll link to the second podcast as well. But there's a lot of videos on there that's of interest. And of course, we have a public museum here in Los Alamos. It's called the Bradbury Science Museum. It's named after our second director, Norris Bradbury, who was the director for 25 years. And that's why he gets the museum named after him. And I would say rightfully so. But it's free. It's open to the public. I don't believe that they are open yet because of COVID, but be sure and check their website before you come to town. But so unfortunately, not a great official online history website for the laboratory, but a lot of other great resources out there. And I'm easy to find too. If you're listening to the podcast and you think, well, I want to know more about why all these weapons were built, I think that's crazy. What are some of the reasons? I answer every email I get. It may not be immediate, because I do get a lot, but I look at my email. The email address is abcarr@lanl.gov, ABCARR at LANL.gov. I will look at it and I will respond to you. If you are interested in, if you'd like a picture of that, the picture of Trinity that I mentioned earlier, send me an email, and or anything else, regardless of where you stand on this history or anything else. If there's something that you think I can help you with, send me an email. If you think that I got something wrong, let me know. I'd really like to hear about it. But those are the different resources to look at. We'll work on the history webpage, though.
That's fantastic, Alan. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet.
And we may come up with something else we want you to talk about sometime in the in the not too distant future as well.
I'm counting on it. I'm counting on it, Keith. It's so good to see you guys again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you live, hopefully in Tennessee, here one of these days. I'm overdue for a trip out there. It's such a wonderful state. I love Tennessee, and an incredible facility, of course, there with Y12 and of course Oak Ridge National Laboratory as well. So let's plan on a barbecue lunch here before too much longer, I
Yeah.
hope.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
We'll take you out to Calhoun's, Tennessee's famous barbecue there.
I'm ready to go back. I think we went there last time, and I remember it well.
We did, for sure. And if we want to find you on YouTube, we just need to search for Alan Carr.
I think so. I'm glad you mentioned that, Ray. I think that if you look up Alan Carr YouTube, you get this British comedian, and I'm not the British comedian, okay?
Okay.
And there's British comedian Alan Carr. There's another British comedian named Jimmy Carr. I don't think that I am related to either of them. My brand of comedy is a little bit different there as well. But what I would recommend doing is look up historian Alan B. Carr YouTube, and hopefully that will take you. I don't have quite as many subscribers as Jimmy and other Alan Carr there, so let's boost my subscribers a little bit.
That's good.
Very good. Thanks for that clarification. That'll help.
Thank you.
I'll subscribe to it momentarily. Okay.
That sounds great, Ray. I appreciate it, and it's great to see you, my friend. That beard is looking phenomenal, I should add.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Keith, it's been so fun talking with you these past two interviews, and I am looking forward to next time. Let's plan on doing it again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ray. Now, who did you say we've got? Do we have somebody scheduled for next time?
Yeah, I'm talking with Jim Walters, who's the executive director of the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History in Albuquerque. And I think he wants to be on our next program if we can make the arrangements. He's been quite busy out there with a recent gala event that they held, and I've been in contact with him. So I'm hoping he'll be able to do our next program. And we'll see. We'll get him. And also, Alan has helped me to connect again with Ellen McGehee, who was a Los Alamos National Laboratory. In fact, she recently retired, but she's still, I think, in a consulting role. She's the one that took me on the tour of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park sites in Los Alamos. Now, that, as Alan knows, that's not available to the public, but it is a part of the national park. And I think it would be good for us to use photographs and have Ellen talk about those particular sites inside the laboratory that eventually I think we'll figure a way to make them available, but there'll be things like virtual tours of them and before they can actually go public, because they're right in the heart of the laboratory in the secure area. So it's not going to be easy to do it. It's kind of like we're struggling with the Beta 3 building at Y12. Located inside the protected area, and again, those are a part of the national park, and we hope to eventually be able to provide public access, but it's difficult. So if we can get her to talk about the particular sites inside the laboratory, and she'll do that for us. She's just struggling with shoulder surgery right now, and so we'll schedule her on down after she gets better. So that's what we've got coming up, Keith. Some exciting, more information from New Mexico, and all of it relates well to Oak Ridge, as you well know. We're truly our sister cities. So Alan, we appreciate you being with us.
Oh, hey.
Alan, thank you so much. And Ray, good to see you. And
You
folks,
bet.
we appreciate you watching.